Chapter 24 of Lotus Buds. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Alice Jane. Lotus Buds by Amy Wilson CARMICHAEL. Chapter 24. The Akals. This sacred work demands not lukewarm, selfish, slack souls, but hearts more finely tempered than steel, wills purer and harder than the diamond. Père Didon. The Akals, without whom this work in all its various branches could not be undertaken, are a band of Indian sisters. The word Akal means older sister, who live for the service of the children. First among the Akals is Ponnamal, golden. With the quick affection of the East, the children find another word for gold and call her doubly golden sister. Sometimes we are asked if we ever find an Indian fellow worker whom we can thoroughly trust. The ungenerous question would make us as indignant as it would if it were asked about our own relations, were it not that we know it is asked in ignorance by those who have never had the opportunity of experiencing, or have missed the happiness of enjoying, true friendship with the people of this land. Those who have known that happiness know the limitless loyalty and the tender, wonderful love that is lavished on the one who feels so unworthy of it all. If there is distance and want of sympathy between those who are called to be workers together with the great Master, is not something wrong? Simple, effortless intimacy, that closeness of touch which is friendship indeed, is surely possible. But rather we would put it otherwise, and say that without it, service together, of the only sort we would care to know, is perfectly impossible. In our work all along we have had this joy to the full. God in His goodness gave us from the first those who responded at once to the confidence we offered them. In India, the ideal of a consecrated life is a life with no reserves, which seeks for nothing, understands nothing, cares for nothing, but to be poured forth upon the sacrifice and service. Pierce through the various incrustations which have overlaid this pure ideal, give no heed to the effect of Western influence and example, and you come upon this feeling, however expressed or unexpressed, at the very back of all, the instinct that recognizes and responds to the call to sacrifice, and does not understand its absence in the lives of those who profess to follow the crucified. Who and to whom this ideal is indeed the gleam that draws and ever draws the soul to passionate allegiance can fail to find in the Indian nature at its truest and finest that kinship of spirit which knits hearts together. And it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. This tells it all. The spring of heart to heart that we call affinity, the knitting no hand can ever afterward unravel, these experiences have been granted to us all through our work together, and we thank God for it. Ponnamal's work lies chiefly among the convert nurses and the babies. She has charge of the nurseries and of the food arrangements, so intricate and difficult to the mere lay mind. She trains her workers to thoroughness and earnestness, and by force of example seems to create an atmosphere of cheerful unselfishness that is very inspiring. How often we have sent a young convert, tempted to self-centeredness and depression, to Ponnamal, and seen her return to her ordinary work braced and bright and sensible. We are all faulty and weak at times, and every nursery, like every life, has its occasional lapses, but on the whole it is not too much to say that the nurseries are happy places, and Ponnamal's influence goes through them all like a fresh wind. And this in spite of very poor health, for Ponnamal, who was the leader of our itinerating band, broke down hopelessly and thought her use in life had passed, till the babies came and brought her back to activity again. And the joy of the Lord, we have often proved, is strength for body as well as soul. Selamutu, who comes next to Ponnamal, is the pearl of previous records, and she has been a pearl to us through all our years together. She is special Akal to the household of children above the baby age, a healthy, high-spirited crow of most diverse dispositions, and she is loved by one and all with a love which is tempered with great respect, for she is all pure justice, as a little girl remarked feelingly not long ago, after being rather sharply reproved for exceeding naughtiness. Within my heart wrath burned like a fire, but my mouth could not open to reply, for inside me a voice said, "It is true, entirely true. Akal is perfectly just." This Akal, however, is most tender in her affections, and among the babies she has some particular specials. One of these is the solemn-faced morsel of the photograph, to save whom she traveled, counting by time, as far as from London to Moscow and back, and the baby arrived as happy and well as when the friends at Moscow sent her off with prayers and blessings and kindness. But the photograph was a shock. "Ai yo!" she said, quite upset to see her delight so misrepresented. "That is not Susila. There is no smile, no pleasure in her face." We comforted her by the assurance that anyone who understood babies and their ways would consider the camera responsible for the expression. And at least the baby was obedient. Had she not told her to make a salam, and had not seen the little hand gone up in serious salute? A perfectly obedient baby is Selamutu's ideal, and she was satisfied. Both these sisters came to us at some loss to themselves, for both could have lived at home at ease if they had been so inclined. Ponnamal lost all her little fortune by joining us. She could perhaps have recovered it by going to law, but she did not feel it right to do so, and she suffered herself to be defrauded. How could I teach others to be unworldly if I myself did what to them would appear worldly-minded? That was all she ever said by way of explanation. Next to Ponnamal and Selamatu came the motherly-hearted Gnanamal and Annamai. They came to us when we were in circumstances of peculiar difficulty. The work was just beginning, and we had not enough trustworthy helpers. So, wearied with disturbed nights, we were almost at the end of our strength. "Send us help," we prayed, and went on each trying to do the work of 3. It was one hot, tiring afternoon when we longed to forget everything and rest for half an hour, but could not because there was so much to do, that a bright, capable face appeared at the door of our room, and Annamai, Lula's beloved, came in and said, "God sent me, and my relative," naming a mission catechist, "brought me, and so I have come." And Gnanamal, we were in dire straits, for a dear little babe had suffered at the hands of one who thought first of herself and second of her charge, and the most careful tending was needed if the baby was to survive. It was then Gnanamal came and took charge of the delicate child, and became the comfort and help she has ever continued to be. When there is serious illness and night nursing is required, Gnanamal is always ready to volunteer, though to her, as to most of us in India, night work is not what the flesh would choose. Then, in the morning, when we go to relieve her, we find her bright as ever, as if she had slept comfortably all the time. We think this sort of help worth gratitude. The convert workers, dear as dear children, but, thank God, dependable as comrades, come next in age to the head Akals. Arulai Tara, known to some as Star, is what her name suggests, something steadfast, something shining, something burning with a pure devotion which kindles other fires. We cannot imagine our children without their beloved Arulai. Then there is Sundoshi, joy. To the left next Suhini in the photo, a young wife for whom poison was prepared 3 times, and whose escape from death at the hand of husband and mother-in-law was one of those quiet miracles which God is ever working in this land of cruelty in dark places. And Suhini, gladness, whose story of deliverance has been told before, and Esli, the gift of a fellow missionary, a most faithful girl, and others younger, but developing in character and trustworthiness. All these young converts need much care, but the care of genuine converts is very fruitful work, and one interesting part of it is the fitting of each to her niche, or of fitting the niche to her. Discernment of spirit is needed for this, for misfits means waste energy and great discomfort, and energy is too good a thing to waste, and comfort too pleasant a thing to spoil. So those who are responsible for this part of the work would be grateful for the remembrance of any who know how much depends upon it. Among the recognized fits in our family is the Akal who loves the unlovable babies. This is Suhini. We tried her once with the Taraha children, but the terrible activity of these young people was altogether too much for the slowly moving machinery of poor Suhini's brain, and she was perfectly overwhelmed and very miserable. For Suhini hates hurry and sudden shocks of any sort, and the babies of maturer years discovered this immediately. And Suhini, waddling forlornly after the babies, looked like a highly respectable duck in charge of a flock of impertinent robins. It was quite a misfit, and Suhini's worst came to the top, and we speedily moved her back again to the Premalia nursery. For there you see Suhini in her true sphere. Give her a poor, puny babe who will never, if she can help it, let her Akal have an undisturbed hour. Give her the most impossible, most troublesome baby in the nursery, and then you will see Suhini's best. We discovered this when Ponamal was in charge of the Nayur nursery. Ponamal had one small infant so cross that nobody wanted her. She would cry half the night, a snarly, snappy cry that would not stop unless she was rocked, and began again as soon as the rocking was stopped. Ponamal gave her to Suhini. Night after night, till 2 in the morning, she would sing to that fractious child. This was Ponamal's story to me when next I went to Nayur. She never seemed to tire. Hymn after hymn she would sing, on and on and on. I never saw her impatient with it. She just loved it from the first. And a curious thing began to happen. The baby grew like her Akal. This likeness was not caught in the photograph, but it is nevertheless so observable that visitors have often asked if the little one were her own child. This baby, Sununda by name, is greatly attached to Suhini. As she is over 2 years old now, she has been promoted to the Tahara, and being an extremely willful little person, she sometimes gets into trouble. One day I was called to remonstrate, and a little morning glory was required, and I put her in a corner to think about it. Another sinner had to be dealt with, and when I returned, Sununda was nowhere to be found. I searched all over the Tahara and in the garden, and finally found her in the Premalia, cuddled close to Suhini. She has told me all about it, said Suhini, who was nursing another edition of difficult infancy, and she looked down on the curly head with eyes of brooding affection, like a tender turtle dove upon her nestling. Then the roguish brown eyes smiled up at me with an expression of perfect confidence that I would understand and sympathize with the desire to share the troubles of this strange, sad life with so beloved an Akal. The question of discipline is sometimes rather difficult with so many dispositions, each requiring different dealing. We try, of course, to fit the penalty to the crime so that the child's sense of justice will work on our side, and in this we always find there is a wonderful unconscious cooperation on the part of the merest baby. But the older children used to be rather a problem. Some had come to us after their wills had become developed and their characters partly formed. Most of them were with us of their own free will and could have walked off any day, for they knew where they would be welcome. Discipline under these circumstances is not entirely easy. But 3 years ago, something of revival power swept through all our family. It was not the great revival for which we wait, but it was something more blessed in effect and abiding in result. And ever since then the tone has been higher and the life deeper, so that there is something to which we can appeal, confident of a quick response. But children will be scampish, and once their earnestness of desire to be good was put to unexpected and somewhat drastic proof. At that time the mild Esli had charge of the sewing class, and the class had got into bad ways. Carelessness and chattering prevailed, so Esli came in despair to me, and I talked to the erring children. They were sorry, made no excuses, and promised to be different in future. I left them repentant and thoroughly ashamed of themselves, and went to other duties. Shortly afterwards Arulai found them in a state of great depression. They told her they had promised to be good at the sewing class, but they were afraid they would forget. Arulai's ideas are usually most original, and she sympathized with the children, but told them there was no need for them ever to forget. They asked eagerly what could be done to help them remember. They had prayed, but even so had doubts. Was there anything to be done besides praying? Arulai said there was, and she expounded certain verses from the book of Proverbs. Sometimes the best way to make a mark upon the mind is to make a mark upon the body, she suggested, and asked the children if they would like this done. The children hesitated. They were aware that Arulai's marks were likely to be emphatic, for Arulai never does things by halves. But their devotion to her and belief in her overcame all fears, and being genuinely anxious to reform, they one and all consented. So she sent a small girl off to look for a cane, and presently one was produced, thin and nice and suitable, as I was afterwards informed. The younger children were invited to take the cane and look at it, and consider well how it would feel. This they did obediently, but still stuck undauntedly to their determination, in fact, were keen to go through with it. Then Arulai explained that when the king said, "Chasten thy son while there is hope, and let not thy soul spare for his crying," he must have been thinking of a very little boy who had not the sense to know what was good for him. They had sense. The mark on the body would be waste punishment if it were not received willingly and gratefully. So, if any child cried or pulled her hand away, she would stop. Then the children all stood up and held out their hands. What a moment for a photograph! Arulai's mark upon the body was a genuine affair, but the class received it with fortitude and gratitude. When I heard this history, an hour or so after its occurrence, I rather demurred. The children had appeared to be sincerely sorry when I spoke to them, and if so, why proceed to extremities? But Arulai answered, with wisdom and much assurance, "They have been talked to before, and have been sorry, but they forgot, and did it again. This time they will not forget." And neither did they. As long as that class continued, its behavior was exemplary, and the mark upon the mind, to judge by their demeanor, remained as fresh as it must have been on that memorable day when the mark upon the body effected its creation. The story ought to end here, but most stories have a sequel, and this has two. The first occurred a few weeks later. A little girl, one of the sewing class, had slipped into the habit of careless disobedience, followed too often by sulks. If we happened to come across her just when the thunderclouds were gathering, we could usually divert her attention and avert the threatened trouble. But if we did not happen to meet her at just the right moment, she would plunge straight into the most outrageous naughtiness with a sort of purposeful directness that was difficult to deal with. Knowing the child well, we often let her choose her own punishments, and she did this so conscientiously that at last, as she herself mournfully remarked, they were all used up, and there was nothing left but the most ancient and perhaps in some cases most efficacious, which, the circumstances being what they were, I was naturally reluctant to try. But the child, trained to be perfectly honest with herself, apparently thought the thing over, and calmly made up her mind to accept the inevitable. For when, anxious she should not misunderstand, I began to explain matters to her, I was met by this somewhat astonishing response. "Yes, Amma, I know. I know you have tried everything else." She said this almost sympathetically, as if appreciating my dilemma. "And so you have to do it. I do not like it at all, But Arulai Akal says it is no use unless I take it willingly. So, Amma, please give me a good caning." The idiom is the same in Tamil as in English, but there is a stronger word which she now proceeded to use with great deliberation. "Yes, Amma, a hot caning. With my full mind I am willing, and I will not cry. Or if I do cry," this was added in a serious, reflecting sort of way, "let not your soul spare for my crying." The second is less abnormal. Esli, whose placid soul had been sadly stirred at the time of the infliction of the mark, was so impressed by its salutary effect that she conceived a new respect for the methods of King Solomon. The application of morning glory is a privilege reserved, as a rule, for ourselves. But one day, being doubtless hard pressed, Esli produced a stick, a very feeble one, and calling up the leader of all rebels, addressed herself to her. Chellalu, as might have been expected, was taken by surprise, and for one short moment Esli was permitted to follow the ways of the king. But only for a moment, for suddenly apprehending the gravity of the situation, and realizing that such precedent should not pass unchallenged, Chellalu, with a quick wriggle, stood forth free, seized the stick with a joyous shout, snapped it in two, and flourished round the room. Then, stopping before her afflicted Akal, she solemnly handed her one of the pieces, and with a bound and a scamper like a triumphant puppy, she was off to the very end of her world with the other half of that stick. When Elf came to us on March 6, 1901, and we began to know some of the secrets of the temple, we tried to save several little children, but we failed. The thought of those first children with whom we came into touch, but for whom all our efforts were unavailing, is unforgettable. We see them still, little children, lost. But we partly understand why we had to wait so long. We had not the workers then to help us take care of them. We had only some of the older Akals who could not have done it alone. These convert girls, who now help us so much, were in Hindu homes. Some of them had not even heard of Christ, whose love alone makes this work possible. For India is not England in its view of such work. There is absolutely nothing attractive about it. It is not honorable work like preaching and teaching. No money would have drawn these workers to us. Work which has no clear ending, but drifts on into the night if babies are young or troublesome. Such work makes demands upon devotion and practical unselfishness, which appeal to none but those who are prepared to love with the tireless love of the mother. I do not want people who come to me under certain reservations. In battle, you need soldiers who fear nothing. So wrote the heroic Père Didon, and though it may sound presumptuous to do so, we say the same. We want as comrades those who come to us without reservations. But such workers have to be prepared, and such preparation takes time. Tarry ye the Lord's leisure is a word that unfolds as we go on. Yet we find that the work, though so demanding, is full of compensations. The convert in her loneliness is welcomed into a family where little children need her and will soon love her dearly. The uncomforted places in her heart become healed, for the touch of a little child is very healing. If she is willing to forget herself and live for that little child, something new springs up within her. She does not understand it, but those who watch her know that all is well. Sometimes long afterwards she reads her own heart story and opens it to us. I was torn with longing for my home. I dreamed night after night about it, and I used to waken just wild to run back. And yet I knew if I had, it would have been destruction to my soul. And then the baby came, and you put her into my arms, and she grew into my heart, and she took away all that feeling, till I forgot I ever had it. This was the story of one, a young wife, for whom the natural joys of home can never be. But if there is selfishness or slackness or a weak desire to drift along in easiness, taking all and giving nothing, things are otherwise. For such the nurseries hold nothing but noise and interruptions. We ask to be spared from such as these, or, if they come, may they be inspired by the constraining love of Christ and the glory of the usual. End of chapter 24.